We are so excited about our next presenter. Jon Kabat-Zinn is a scientist, writer, and teacher who helped create the field of stress reduction. He's clinically demonstrated the benefits of ancient traditions of mindfulness and meditation, and he's adapted these for mainstream Western medicine and society, for people who are healthy or living with chronic illness, for Olympic athletes and corporate cultures. Jon Kabat-Zinn offers wise perspective on inhabiting the ordinary and extreme stresses of our lives. Jon Kabat-Zinn is the founding director of the renowned Stress Reduction Clinic and the Center for Mindfulness in Medicine, Healthcare, and Society at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. He's also gained a global audience with his books, which include Full Catastrophe Living and Wherever You Go, There You Are, and Coming to Our Senses, Healing Ourselves and the World Through Mindfulness. You'll be able to purchase some of those books at lunchtime if you're interested. But we are so honored to welcome Jon Kabat-Zinn here today.
So, Doro, thank you for that lovely introduction, and how sweet to be here. And I'm just very touched by everything that we've been exposed to up to this point. So, you know, it's not that usual to come to a conference of one kind or another and be asked, well, what song would you want to walk down the aisle with? And I chose Dylan, you know, and the times they are changing, in part because I want to honor our most recent Nobel laureate in literature. And that really is a kind of not only mindful but transformational decision on the part of the Nobel Prize Committee. And I think really both acknowledges and at the same time stretches the envelope of mental models that can sometimes get a little bit ossified. And so we're talking about optimal health today and its relationship to mindfulness, or at least I am. And so I want to really have this be more experiential than just me standing up here and giving a talk. Because mindfulness is about our relationship to everything. It's really about relationality, and it's about awareness. And so when we were moving, for instance, I mean, the body is just meant to move. And when we live very sedentary lives, then that compounds all of the various dissipative processes that eventually lead to disease. And so the challenge is not so much, in my view, not so much to attain optimal health, because that kind of makes it sound like it's one thing and we got to grab it. But health really is related to a kind of nonlinear, dynamical, complex system that's never the same. I mean, the health of a 20-year-old is very different from the health of an 80-year-old. But an 80-year-old or even an 100-year-old, like my mother who died at the age of 101 in last December, they're very different, but they are all in some sense optimizing what we're capable of. And so that optimizing, you could think of it as a kind of fine-tuning. It's not so much that we're trying to get anything, because you can't grab onto health. And a lot of the time, of course, that's what we want to do. Like everything else, we turn it into a commodity, and we just kind of grasp at it. Or what would be you know, the challenges to health, and try to just push away what we don't want and grab onto what it is that we do want, is that we're continually off balance. And that itself is stressful, because we're being driven by fear and by, frankly, a certain kind of acquisitiveness that borders on greed, and a lot of it's delusionary. And therefore, is not a great prescription for a happy life across the lifespan. So the question of what it means to be healthy, there's like a 4-month-old baby girl back there, and she's like the embodiment of health. And so are you, and so am I. Even though I have a sort of a cough today, so, a little bit of a, cold. And so part of the message is that it's not going to be like some perfect thing. And it's not to sort of look a certain way, weigh a certain amount, or pretend that you're in some situation where you're not, but much more to drop in to how things already are. So let's say you feel like this is a plague of being a woman, is that it's never good enough. That you have to lose weight, or you have to look a certain way, or you have to dress a certain way, or whatever it is. And part of the message here is that you're okay just as you are. In fact, you're perfect just as you are. So this is not about self-improvement, mindfulness, meditation, so forth. It's not about self-improvement because there's no improving on you. You're perfect exactly as you are. People say, yeah, but what about the 20 pounds? And you say, that's perfect too. And the question is, can you love yourself all the way to wherever you think you need to be? But you may discover that the love actually does all the work. And so I'd like to suggest that, right now we sort of drop in for a moment or two. We've got, they've given me an hour to do this, and or given us an hour to do this, and I really want to express my gratitude for having this kind of time. And the thing about mindfulness is another way to speak about awareness. Okay? So there's awareness, nothing special about that, right? Except that if you didn't have that capacity, there'd be no life at all. So for instance, can you be aware of your body sitting in this room in this moment? With whatever sounds are in the room as they are. So not like, well, I'd be having a great meditation if only it weren't for these ambient sounds. No, let's let the ambient sounds be part of how things are in this moment. And can we drop in to a sense of the body as a whole sitting here breathing? Why? Because we're actually learning how to pay attention to what's already okay with us. And if there's anybody here who is not breathing, I want you to come up and see me afterwards, and we can have an offline discussion, okay? But how much of the time do we actually appreciate that we are breathing? And not only that, we say, I'm breathing, but frankly, that can't quite be true. In the same way as we say, I have a body, Yeah, who's claiming that? So there's a little bit of a mystery in what we even mean when we recruit the personal pronouns to talk about ourselves. And part of the theme of today, both in terms of the fine-tuning in the interiority and the social sort of engagement with the world and the inhabiting of the world, is that there's no separation between the inner and outer. And the mystery of what we mean when we use the word self, when we investigate it, we find out that whoever we are, we're a hell of a lot bigger, more capable, and actually healthier than who we think we are, no matter what the narrative is about how horrible we are, how depressed we are, how hopeless we are, that it's actually all okay because it's all wrong. Those are merely thoughts that we then actually believe as true and then ossify ourselves or precipitate around whatever our partially formed thoughts are about who we are. So, for instance, if we say, I'm breathing, and I'm sure you'll all agree, you're breathing, right? But frankly, if it were up to you, whoever you think you are, to be breathing, let's face it, you would have died a long time ago. Oh, got distracted, oops, I got to take a call or send a tweet or whatever, and it's like, dead. Forgot. So, speaking of the biology of the organism and the beauty of it and how important it is to kind of, in some sense, protect it in an increasingly toxic environment, not just from aluminum, but the stress itself is toxic. There are all sorts of things going on in the society that are kind of like a cauldron of toxicity. We live inside of it. We need to learn how to, in some sense, become transparent to it to whatever degree we can. And of course, take the kinds of precautions that your research looks like. It's suggesting it's not just a nightmare, but that there may be potential ways in which we can protect ourselves from, say, cognitive decline, early onset Alzheimer's disease, and so forth. And it's beautiful to see how much science can play a role in actually understanding and then regulating our capacity for living healthy lives across the lifespan. So here we are, sitting and breathing. Can we just drop in on ourselves for a moment and experience, say, the body sitting here breathing, with no agenda other than to be awake and aware? So let's play with that for a moment, as a kind of fine-tuning of the guitar string. Can you simply be who and as you already are, and simply embrace it in awareness, or if you will, rest in awareness, drop in, cradle your very self in awareness, in the only moment any of us ever have, which is this one. I can tell you one thing, the baby has no agenda. It's not trying to get anywhere, simply being however she is. Can we be however we are in this moment and learn or encourage ourselves to inhabit the space of our own awareness? And a very, very good place to start is the body. Because as they say, you can't leave home without it. And it can actually help us remember and retune moment by moment by moment. So not just like because I'm doing this artificial exercise with you. And just to say, if you're watching this online or you're watching this on a very large aircraft carrier, it's just as applicable. Because we only have this moment in which to live, and we are all breathing. And it's not really the breath. When we talk about breath, live. The t-shirt says, live, love, breathe. Those are not aspirations. It's already happening. And the violence, and it really is a form of violence, is when we get so distracted that we miss it. And then you have to live in another moment because you just lost this one. Whoops, gone. Breath in, breath out, gone. So it's not about the breath, it's about your relationship to the breath, intimacy with the breath. And just to say, this is a beautiful room in part because it's intimate. So how intimate can you be with your own experiencing of life unfolding? And the breath is a nice element to that, but it's not the only one. So can you be aware of what's coming in through the ears? Not just my moving my tongue and my lips and creating vibrations in the air that are oscillating your tympanic membranes and creating, sort of electrical activity in the auditory cortex. As I continue to say this sentence, and that your eyes are working, presumably, to one degree or another. All of your senses are available. Smell, the sort of core elemental, the aroma of the air itself, the fragrance of the air itself. And then can we expand the field of awareness, say around the breath, to include, sort of the body as a whole? Just playing with that. And we don't do this for long because actually I'm going to give a kind of talk. So we could do this for the whole time. And in fact, you could do it while I'm talking because you can be present as opposed to distracted, self-preoccupied, self-centered. So just feeling the breath in the body. Maybe you could put your mind in your hands. See if you can actually feel the sensations in your hands. If you've ever looked at the hands of a kind of statue by Michelangelo or Bellini, think about it for a moment. Your hands aren't made of marble. And no matter how beautiful a job Michelangelo or Bernini did, your hands are more beautiful. Can you put your mind in your hands? And just let them be what they are. Feel them and touch with them. And touch. The hands usually, that's what they're for, touching. But actually you can touch them with your heart. And in that sense, tuning in this way and dropping from, sort of suspending all the doing from moment to moment and taking at least some time during your day to drop into being is actually a love affair with life. It's like getting in touch with the actuality of things. And so re-enlivening, as opposed to when we're on autopilot and zoning through our moments, there's a certain way in which we're kind of deadening ourselves, tuning out. And it's not about being perfect, as I said, because you're already perfect. And even with all the imperfections that your mind is going to come up with and say, well, he doesn't know who I am, I'm a basket case, and this way or that way, or this is the matter with me, and this is how I have to improve on myself. No, that's part of the perfection, is that you think you're imperfect, or that you're dealing with what Zorba the Greek called the full catastrophe of life. The full catastrophe, which is everything. But it's not a catastrophe, it's beautiful. It's the human condition, and that means also the ugliness, the horror, the trauma. It's not that it's beautiful, but how you hold it makes all the difference in whether there's healing or whether there's merely agony and rending. So, are you still with your hands? How about the feet? Maybe you can play with shifting your awareness to your feet. Now, how many of you would say that you have a regular meditation practice more or less every day? Raise your hands up high. Okay. And how many of you want to, but it just never seems to be the right time whenever you think, everybody else. Yeah. So now's the only time. Okay? And a lot of the problem is that what you think about the meditation is not real meditation. Real meditation is like what we're doing now. And you probably can't tell whether we're meditating or I've started the talk. That's good. And that's why I'm doing it this way, because I want you to stretch into the notion that the real meditation practice is how you live your life from moment to moment. Not what's happening in the moment, but how you are willing to or not willing to be in wiser, more loving relationship with it. And so here's a little homework exercise for you, several, okay? What we just did with the hands and feet. And you think, well, meditation practice is so annoying. If you want to do it at all, it's annoying. You have to get out of bed. No, you don't. You could do this in bed. When you wake up in the morning, what do you usually do when you wake up in the morning? Are you already late? Do you catapult out of bed? Can you bring any awareness to that fact? That you're already behind what, we don't know, but you're already behind as soon as you're awake. So rather than just jumping out of bed, play with just lying in bed on your back in what in yoga they call the corpse pose. And there's real reasons for it, like, because it's an invitation to die to the past, die to the future, and therefore come alive in this only moment. And just for 1 or 2 or 3 breaths, lying there, let the awakening process complete itself. So that before you jump out of bed, you're in your body, as we say. Or your mind and your body, there's no separation. And heart, too. So that there's a realization, a realizing that you're not dead yet. You woke up. Someday you won't. So it's incredibly precious. And then you can get out of bed. So then there's no excuse for not meditating, because we've all got those 3 moments before we jump out of bed. Or you could even, if you were really radical about this and wanted to change your lifestyle in a way that actually balanced being and doing, you could wake up earlier. And I kid you not, I mean, mindfulness, Shakespeare wrote a play called Much Ado About Nothing. So, when we, in the early days, and I'll talk about this a little bit, have people come and visit the stress reduction clinic, usually people, who are paying for it from, sort of insurance companies and so forth. And they come and they see a room of 30 or 40 people, all with medical problems, chronic medical problems, that they're not getting satisfaction from mainstream medicine for dealing with. And so their physicians send them to this program as a complement to whatever their medical treatments are. And they see a bunch of people, and we do this lying on the floor too, in what's called body scan meditation. So you see like 30 medical patients or 40 lying on the floor, and of course the person from the insurance company, we pay for this? They're like asleep. They're not doing anything. So it looks like, and then all this talk about mindfulness now, it's on everybody's lips, it's on the side of buses, mindfulness. Nobody knows what it means. It's only the hardest thing in the world for us human beings to string even 1 or 2 moments of mindfulness together. Because our default mode, and maybe I'll get around to the neuroscience of the default mode system, but our default mode is distraction. And as soon as you take your seat or lie in bed and you start to really watch your mind, the first thing you'll notice is it's almost never present. It's always off someplace else, being caught in one story or another, usually about the past and how great it was, how much better than now, or how horrible it is, which explains why, and who's to blame for how I am now. Or the future and how great it will be when, or, how terrifying it is. And, so between the future and the sucking of the future and the past and the gravitational pull of the past, the present moment, which is the only one we're breathing in or alive or capable of loving, it gets seriously obliterated. And what we're doing is reclaiming this only moment and learning how to inhabit it, not to become some kind of bozo, but actually to fine-tune the entirety of our instrument, which isn't just say, grounded in the body, but thoughts and emotions, for instance, and acuity of all the senses, and the multiplicity of senses. And there are far more than 5 now. I mean, there's interoception, there's proprioception, there's I'm holding my hand up here. I can't see it. Can you all see my hand? I can't see it. I know exactly where my hand is. That's a form of intelligence, it's a sense. So back to much ado about nothing. So mindfulness looks like it's like much ado about nothing. But I like to say it turns out that that nothing is just about everything. Okay, because it's like the core constituent of our humanity. If we're not capable of awareness, if we're not just capable of it, because we're all capable of it, but if we're so distracted that we're never here, then we can never recruit the full dimensionality of our body, of our intelligences to actually be whole. The root meaning of the word health, healing, and wholeness. So much ado about nothing is not so really. It's much ado about what looks a lot like nothing, but turns out to be just about everything. And it's also the hardest work in the world. To string a few moments of mindfulness is not easy. So we have to exercise, if you will, the muscle of mindfulness. Working with our own, impedance, reluctance to actually do this because we are so distractible and we're so busy and we're so stressed that we now is never the right time. Is this making any sense to you? Okay. So it's a cultivation. It's not an idea. It's not a philosophy. It's not a catechism. It's a way of being. And then out of that way of being, you can do anything. And it will be more informed and you'll recruit more intelligences to it. And you'll recruit more of your sensory dimensions to it. So then your thoughts and emotions, instead of in some sense being sources of stress, they can become sources of imagination and creativity and connectedness. So it's not so much about, like, a lot of our emotions, we get caught up in anxiety, depression, anger, and so forth. And then we're just at the mercy of our own emotions. So this is serious stuff. It's not some dime store little relaxation exercise. It's a kind of core challenge of our humanity. And it's much too serious to take too seriously. So that's why, I like the playfulness of this conference because, we're talking about the full catastrophe of the human condition. It is terrifying. I mean, just look at look in any direction and you'll see it. I mean, I'm trying to avoid mentioning the election by, by mentioning the election. But, it's seriously terrifying in a certain way. And then the full catastrophe of like just getting a medical diagnosis, an unwanted medical diagnosis. And then, we do all die. So how can we actually live? Thoreau said it very beautifully, and somebody mentioned that to me before I came in, so I thought maybe I'll include that quote. Thoreau in Walden said, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what they had to teach, and not when I came to die, discover that I hadn't lived." So that's the risk, is that you'll live your whole life and then just before you die, you'll wake up and realize, I got it all wrong. I was caught up in my own anger, my own depression, my own self-centeredness, I'd be happy to show up for life if only it were different from the way it is. Well, that doesn't work so well. How about just showing up for life as it is and then finding that that's workable? So let me say a few things about MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. The work I started out of my own meditation practice, which I came to when I was 21 years old, and I was a graduate student in molecular biology at MIT. Okay, and somebody had invited a Zen teacher to come to MIT and give a talk. And I saw the poster for it. And the poster said, The Three Pillars of Zen, a talk by Philip Kapleau at the invitation of Houston Smith, who was a professor of philosophy and religion at MIT. I was in molecular biology. But I'm walking along the corridors at MIT, and I see this poster. I didn't know what Zen was. I didn't know who Houston Smith was, and I didn't know who Philip Kapleau was. But I went to that talk. And aside from Philip Kapleau, who was giving the talk, and Houston Smith, who had invited him, I think there were 3 people. And I was one of them. 21 years old, mind you. And that talk took the top off my head. It was like, you know, I was very young, but it still felt like I'd been looking for this my whole life. Some kind of way of being that allowed for a larger way of holding things that didn't seem to fit together in one way or another, including a lot of kind of centripetal, stressful, rending sort of forces in life. So, you know, so I started practicing then, and, you know, a lot of people fall into fads, like, you know, people get into meditation for like 10 minutes or whatever, and that's the end of their meditation experience. But this is 52 years later, and I'm still doing it. And I decided after some point that I didn't want to do molecular biology. I wanted to, because everybody seemed to be doing molecular biology, but nobody was doing, like, how does this relate to what's important in our lives, in mainstream life, not Buddhism, not some kind of, you know, arcane spirituality, but how does this relate to health? How does it relate to well-being? So I started talking to doctors at the medical center where I happened to be a postdoc in cell biology, and I would ask them questions like, what percentage of your patients, and this is, mind you, in 1979, when medicine was very, very different from now. I mean, usually if like you went to see the doctor, you could actually spend some time with the doctor. Now, you may get 6 minutes, you know, but that'd be it. So I would ask them, well, what percentage of your patients do you think you actually help? And they said the most astonishing things. They would say, well, maybe 20%, maybe 15%. And I said, my God, what happens to the other 80%? You know? They said, well, they either get better on their own, or they never get better. And I said, well, do you think it would be useful if we set up a clinic where you send all the people you don't know what to do with, but are not happy with the way medicine is going, their own health trajectory of health and well-being, you send them to a clinic where we'll train them in fairly rigorous and intensive Buddhist meditation without the Buddhism, and mindful hatha yoga, in a sort of classroom kind of context, so a clinic in the form of a course, an 8-week-long course for outpatients, and see what happens. And since, of course, I've trained as a scientist, I knew immediately, in order for anybody to believe anything, you have to actually document it. You have to ultimately do very rigorous science on it. And the physicians would say things, well, I can think of about 30 or 40 people I'd send you tomorrow. You know, because after a while, I don't know how many physicians are in the room, but after a while, you know, with some of these chronic, you know, circumstances that, you know, really are hard to treat, physicians, like, if you see one of those patients walking down the hall, you duck into the bathroom. You don't actually want to make the connection anymore. So this became the stress reduction clinic at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center in 1979. And as I said, entirely based on training, not some kind of intellectual classroom, training in mindfulness meditation and yoga. But from a universal perspective, meditation is really about paying attention. So there's nothing particularly magical, mystical, or religious, or even spiritual about that. So that is like a very big mouth of the funnel because it can draw in anybody who's suffering. And that's really, you know, when you come right down to it, it's about suffering. The word suffering in Latin means to carry. So what are we carrying in our hearts? What are we carrying in our lives that is weighty, that weighs us down, that slows us down, that sometimes hurts? And as a society, we are carrying a lot. And you're seeing it played out in the news every single day. I mean, I've never seen such a public acknowledgement of how hard it is to be a woman without, in this society, without being not just objectified, but in some sense preyed on by predators who simply think that you're game, fair game. Do you know what I'm talking about? I think some people know what I'm talking about. Okay? But men don't know that. We live in an alternate universe that doesn't realize, okay? It's all about realization. Doesn't realize or make real the experience of the other because, why? Because it's not my problem. I'm like, and even if you have a sister, you might not get it because what it requires is a kind of rotation in consciousness. Now, this is only as old as humanity. Didn't Aristophanes write a play about it? But now it's coming out in a way that allows us to hold it as a society, to be more mindful of that. Okay? The other thing is body cameras. I mean, yeah, everybody knows there was slavery in this country for hundreds of years. Everybody knows there was trafficking in human beings. But, until you have body cameras, that's some people's experience in the society, not other people's experience, because you don't have a first-person direct experience. If you're African American and you have a son within a certain age range, no matter how educated, no matter how whatever, you are worried about certain things that a white person just never comes up. Except now, with the body cameras, we're actually seeing it. People who have never seen it, who don't have that's mindfulness. We are collectively, as a society becoming more mindful of what? We're becoming more mindful of what we don't see, of what we don't know, knowing what we don't know. That's a form of wisdom. Okay? So implicit racial racism, implicit racial bias. There are measures of it, that really demonstrate, and Mike Pence demonstrated it the other day, in a dialogue of some kind with a reporter, that where you get caught because you don't recognize the humanity of the other and the way in which you don't recognize your own not recognizing the humanity. Did you follow that? It was like, white privilege is another one. So again, it's just to say that as a society, we are cooking at a certain point in history that has tremendous gravitas and tremendous potential creativity to actually use the opportunities, use these horrible, horrific events as opportunities to actually wake up, become more in touch with, and therefore, achieving optimal health. It's like, how healthy can you be in a sick society? In a society that itself is sort of rending and pulling itself apart in some ways, or disregarding the other, and it's all about me. How healthy can you be in that kind of society? So in a sense, and that's why, when I speak about this, the mindfulness-based stress reduction clinic is now nested for more than 20 years now in a center for mindfulness in medicine, healthcare, which is where we started out, and society. Because if we're not taking care of the outer, then there's only so much of this and so much drinking wheatgrass or whatever it is that, you're trying to take care of yourself. But if, there's aluminum all over the place and you don't know it, and it's like, concentrating in your temporal parietal junction or, the hippocampus, it's not good. So we have to have a big, and if we're giving the planet a fever, meanwhile we're meditating and we're so happy and we're losing weight and everything's cool, and your grandchildren are going to be underwater, it's not cool. This is not cool. So we need to, in some sense, get back to that root meaning of health and healing, and that is wholeness. We live on one planet. We have one very, very, very thin atmosphere. And when we become aware through science that we're actually polluting our own home, that awareness is mindfulness. But if it's not applied to transform how we are in relationship to it all, then we become, in a way, this human species becomes the autoimmune disease of planet Earth. We are both the agent of the disease and its first victim, okay? And we're all in this together. We're all in this together. So rather than focusing on how different we are, part of this healing really involves recognizing our commonality as well as the beauty of the differences. And that's happening in this society. It's very beautiful trends in the society in that regard, but it also generates a lot of fear in people, and a lot of animosity, and a lot of desire to blame whoever you can conveniently blame when you're not feeling like you're getting yours, or that you're not a part of the flowering or whatever. And so this willingness to investigate your own perspective on life and ask the deep question, who am I in the first place? Because when we craft narratives for ourselves that aren't really true, then we're going to find scapegoats, we're going to find enemies, we're going to create us and them. And we've been doing the us and them thing for about 8,000 or 9,000 years, but now with nuclear weapons. Nobody wants that kind of horror, but the human mind that doesn't know itself, that's the kind of horror that it creates. The human mind that knows itself creates what's in the Louvre, what's in the symphony halls, poetry. You showed a slide from Rumi, a quote from Rumi, so I don't know where you are, but anyway, Rumi said in a poem called The Guest House. What's that? The Guest House is on the back of the poem? Oh, how cool is that? I didn't even know that. Yeah. This being human is a guest house. Rumi says, this poem is 900 years old. This being human is a guest house. Every moment, it says what's it say? Every what? Every morning. I changed it. It's like, he's not going to sue me. This being human is a guest house. Every moment, not just every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. How many of you can relate? A joy, a depression, a meanness, okay? What comes up in the mind? A lot of the time it's not happy. That's okay. That's what this is saying. A joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. I don't know why unexpected, because we have a steady diet of it in our lives, so it's like, oh, you again. But often it's unexpected. I didn't sign up for this. Welcome. And what's he say? He says, welcome and entertain them all. What's that mean? Practically speaking, whether you're doing it standing on your head or sitting or whatever, welcoming them, first of all, means dropping in on yourself and then putting out the welcome mat for everything that arrives at your door. Everything. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Sergio Leone movie title. Without opinion, not trying to say, no, I'll just go for the good, I don't want the bad and the ugly. No, let it all come out and then realize it's not you. The ugly's not when you say, I'm just the most horrible person in the world, or lacking in this or that, or inadequate, or it's not true. So when we put out the welcome mat in this way, welcome and entertain them all, even, he says, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Have any of you ever felt that? I mean, trauma is so rampant in our society. We're so traumatized, a lot of the time we become dissociated or inured to how traumatized we are because it's so socially difficult to deal with. And so we're cut off even from ourselves, never mind from other people. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a host of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. This is pure mindfulness instruction. It's like a meditation instruction manual. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a host of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. She may be cleaning you out for some new delight. In other words, the willingness to be aware actually washes the board because you're no longer buying into it as me, as I, me, and mine. Why? Because you see that those are guests coming to the guest house. It's not you. You are the guest house. Greet them at the door laughing. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Greet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful. So laughing, that's advanced training. A lot of the time we won't be laughing. But greet them at the door. Maybe just a tiny little smile. Greet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful. So there's the gratitude piece, which is huge. Be grateful for whoever comes because each has been sent as a guide from. And then he says, or it's translated, I don't know what it is in Persian, beyond. So what does beyond mean? It's like from the mystery of not knowing. But really fecund, really available to us. It's like workable. We can actually work with it. And then you know what meditation becomes? You know what life becomes? It becomes a love affair. And not just with the good or the wanted, but with the totality of it, even the suffering, even the part that pulls you apart, even the losses. And it's not to paper it over and make it any better. It will not be better. It'll simply be bigger and more heartful over time. If you do the work. If you don't do the work, then it could be that you wind up creating a narrative about that is imprisoning. Are you following what I'm saying? This is what mindfulness is all about. This is what meditation is all about. It's like greet them at the door, putting the welcome mat out for. Not just what you want, but going beyond what you want, what you don't want. The Buddhists have a very beautiful way of putting this that I think really we need to adopt, because it's like the thing about that tradition is, first of all, the Buddha wasn't a Buddhist. Okay, so the ism part of it is not the whole story. I mean, it really is. He was more like a scientist and often spoken of also as a doctor, physician of the world. And his analysis of the state of the world, this is 2,600 years ago, it's like mapped out in the form of a medical diagnosis, etiology, or the cause of the problem, the prognosis, which is a very positive, good prognosis, that it's possible to actually deal with suffering in a way that is liberating, transformative, and healing, and then a treatment plan. We can go, that's neither here nor there, but the Buddhists have a beautiful way of talking about liberation, which is also what Americans like to talk about. I mean, it's like, that's what we're about. We're about freedom. We're the country of the, freedom and liberation. But a lot of the time we're not liberated from our own self-imprisoning tendencies. And then we blame it on everything outside, stress and stuff like that. But stress is relational too. So it's not the stress, it's how you position yourself in relationship to it. That you can always change, even if you're going to die tomorrow and you know it. Not dead yet. How am I going to be in relationship to that? And a lot of the time when people are in that particular point in their lives, they're no longer interested in themselves and dying. They're more, how are the people I love the most going to deal with this? And there's an enormous amount of compassion, right? Coming out of a person who you'd think like they're the ones that should be getting the compassion. Instead, they're giving the compassion. So the Buddhists will say, cultivate equanimity that's beyond, and happiness that's beyond causes and conditions. It's like the Greek, Aristotle called it eudaimonia, okay? We're talking about high-level wellness or absolute wellness or optimal wellness. Aristotle called it eudaimonia. I mean, he named it only like, however many thousands of years ago it was. An equanimity, a clarity, a groundedness in awareness that's not caught up or dependent on what they call causes and conditions. In other words, when the proverbial stuff is hitting the proverbial fan, how are you? That's as much an opportunity when the losses are huge, when the rending, when the pain, when the suffering is unbearable. Those are all opportunities to dance, which was what Zorba the Greek did with it. Zorba, the title of my first book, Full Catastrophe Living, comes from Zorba the Greek. And Zorba's solution was every time he was like a full catastrophe himself, total, everything he touched turned to failure, including family, everything, business. He'd get up and he'd dance. And he, would let it go. And there's something very beautiful about cultivating a kind of well-being that doesn't depend on always feeling well. Okay? In fact, that's how you optimize eudaimonia. And the body always has its ear to the rail. It's always listening. So, and when it listens, it's self-transforming. We now know from science, and this is where I'll come back to the default mode network. Let's say scientists want to know, they want to look at, say, the brain and see what it does under various circumstances, say, meditating, okay? So now you can put somebody in a scanner and say, well, just meditate. But before you meditate, don't do anything, because we have to get a baseline. So you go into an fMRI scanner, and they say, just don't do anything, just lie there. And when they started doing this about 10, 15 years ago, they discovered that you put someone in a scanner and say, don't do anything, their brain goes crazy, and they start to create enormous amount of energy and activity in certain regions of the brain. And it's this region, the prefrontal and frontal cortex, this whole region of the brain, and down into deeper structures, the anterior cingulate and the posterior cingulate, that are associated with what? With two things. One is mind wandering. You put in a scanner, you said don't do anything. What's the first thing that happens? Your mind just starts to go everywhere. And mostly what it does when it goes everywhere, if you start to examine it, which is what mindfulness is about, check your own mind. See what it does. I mentioned a lot of the time it's in the future, a lot of the time it's in the past, but you can bring it back. That's the discipline of the practice in a certain way. So when the mind starts to wander, where does it wander to? And you can do this experiment yourself, of course, moment by moment or special times throughout the day. And you will find that when the mind starts to wander, it wanders into its favorite subject. And its favorite subject is me. What could be more interesting than me? Me and my story, my relationship to whatever. So if it's going well, then my success. If it's going badly, my failure, or my inadequacy, or my face, or my weight, or my this or that. But it's always like me. I, me, mine, mine. We call this in the sort of mindfulness field, we call it selfing. That's our default mode. That's called, this region of the brain is called the default mode network. Why? Because you default to that as soon as nothing's happening that's that interesting, you go into the story of me. Now, with awareness, the awareness is like a finger touching a soap bubble. The story is like a soap bubble. It has no essential reality. It's a fabrication, but it's also a very deep habit, and that you can create very elaborate stories. And, how many of you have stories about your parents, for instance? Anybody have stories about your parents? If you were asked about your parents, you'd have something to say, right? It's probably, you've said it 50 million times. It's probably not true. Your parents might object to it even, or say, wait a minute, that's not me, that's a tiny little piece of me. I'll bet you, how many of you have kids? I'll bet you have stories about your kids. Even if they're fairly young, you're already generating a story about them. So what about awareness of the tendency to generate the stories? We're not trying to shut it down or not do it, but as soon as you learn to rest in awareness, as we were doing in the guided meditation, then interesting things happen, and they've shown that 8 weeks of MBSR, for instance, you're cultivating activity in another region of the brain that didn't used to come online so much, and that is called what they're calling an experiential network in the cortex, involving the insula and other structures over here, and it uncouples from the story of me default mode, and this attenuates. So then when you have thoughts about yourself, you've got another form of intelligence here that can remind you that who you think you are is not who you are. Then you have a whole, like Archimedes, leverage point. You have a whole way of leveraging wisdom because you no longer believe your own propaganda, especially your own negative propaganda, but also in the case of narcissists, not that I'm going back to the election, but you can see this being played out moment to moment, actually, in any of the debates. This sense of... So, as soon as you are in awareness, you no longer have to be caught by your own habitual tendencies to believe your thoughts. And that is liberation. That is freedom. And that is also the sort of wellspring of creativity, wellspring of imagination, the wellspring of relationality, so that you can actually see your children as who they are, as opposed to your heavy-duty expectations for them, perhaps, or see your future without, necessarily creating fantasies about it, but to actually live in the actuality, which is infinitely more creative than the fantasy, and therefore freedom. Liberation from all of the ways in which we compound our own suffering. Yes, there are all sorts of things that happen that we have no control over. No control over, and are very, very stressful. But most of the suffering comes from even how we will be in relationship to that. A hurricane, a tornado, an earthquake, a cancer diagnosis. How will we hold that in the very brief moment that we have, that we call a lifetime? And so when we're talking about optimal health, in my view, it really comes down to a recognition of our own beauty, right in this moment. And everything we know from science, neuroscience, a new field called epigenetics, a new field that has to do with telomeres and telomerase and is related to biological aging. All sorts of studies are now demonstrating that when you practice this non-doing, you take some time in your day by the clock, which is very hard to do in a real discipline for cultivating non-doing, and then you take that into the world so your 24 hours, or at least when you're not in deep sleep, becomes a symphony, so to speak, of mindfulness. And you can be more or less in the present moment or keep coming back when you drift away. Not get lost in the personal pronouns and the story of me, then you're about as optimal as you're ever going to get. And you won't be attached to being optimal. You will never have to think that thought. You'll be healthy. And if you happen to have something wrong with you, that's okay. We say to the people falling through the cracks of the healthcare system, and that was in 1979. Now, we don't refer to them as cracks anymore in the healthcare system in America. We refer to them as chasms or Grand Canyons. We say to our people when they are referred to us by their doctors for every conceivable medical malady in the world, we say to them, listen, from our perspective, as long as you're breathing, there's more right with you than wrong with you, no matter what's wrong with you. And we're going to pour energy into what's right with you in the form of attention, in the form of awareness, in the form of self-compassion. Let the rest of the hospital take care of what's wrong with you if they can, and see what happens over a period of 8 weeks. Now, I'll tell you, what happens is that, well, physicians will often say to me, I don't know what you did with Mrs. So-and-so, but she changed more in 8 weeks with you than she changed in 8 years with me. And I'll respond, well, that's interesting because we didn't do anything with her. She did it all herself, only even applying the verb do to mindfulness is not so accurate because it's more like being. So when you drop into being, what is actually happening? I think one of the things that's happening is that you're actually clearing the decks for learning, which is one of the reasons that we see changes in the hippocampus getting much thicker, because it is one of the regions that is involved in learning and memory. And it gets thicker with 8 weeks of training in this kind of thing. So it's not like we did anything, but when you cultivate being, and then you let the doing, your doing, whatever it is, exercising, for instance. I mean, you can exercise and tune out, or you can exercise and tune in. Recreational people who do that, mostly they tune out. I train I work with the Olympic athletes and also collegiate athletes. At the highest levels of performance, they don't tune out, they tune in. It makes a huge difference. So in every way, shape, and form, the more we learn how to inhabit the domain of being, the more the doing that comes out of being is meaningful, healthier, more inclusive of others, and potentially transformative. So we're learning. Out of the learning, we're growing. Out of the growing, we're healing. And what do I mean by healing? My working definition of healing is it's coming to terms with things as they are. It's not fixing. Medicine's all about fixing, and it's very bad at it. Coming to terms with things as they are. Is it easy? No. That's why it's worth doing. And then what comes out of that? Transformation. What does that mean? In some sense, what transformation means is not believing your story anymore. Then all of a sudden, the you that doesn't believe your story is a much bigger you. And you know what that you is called? That space that you inhabit that is beyond the story, but not denying of the story to the degree that it's true, that's called awareness. That's called mindfulness. And it's also called, in my way of speaking, heartfulness. Because, excuse me, in all Asian languages, the word for mind and the word for heart, same word. So when you hear the word mindfulness, not a bad idea to also hear the word heartfulness or feel the word heartfulness. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of poems, if that's all right with you. So I'd like to invite you to, as you hear these poems, to sort of not hear them with your mind, but drink them in with your whole being. And you'll see why I'm featuring these two poems. You've already got The Guest House. I mean, that poem is 900 years old. It's like so powerful. And it's an instruction manual. You could just live inside that poem for the rest of your life and you'd be way ahead of the curve. But here's one from Emily Dickinson, one of our poets, this is a favorite poem of mine. And with Emily Dickinson, you have to listen very carefully because no one ever before or after wrote like this. Used language in this kind of a way. You can even see it on the page, the way the poem is parsed. It's like very unusual. And before I give you this poem, I just want to prime you in a certain way by asking, how has anybody in this room ever sort of, did you ever fall in love as a teenager? Anybody fall in love as a teenager? Raise your hand if you did. Okay, some people. And then feel this incredible feeling of agony when somehow you fell out of love, or your love was not, reciprocated. That teenagers will do that, not reciprocate. Of course, so will adults. But that feeling of like, my heart is broken and I will never, ever make my heart that available or vulnerable because it is too painful when it's broken. Okay? Because when you fall in love, it's the first instance, especially for the first time, of being selfless. Like that I can't live without it. My whole being is in the other. So it's really a moment of awakening, but it comes with a lot of depression. So in Emily Dickinson's case, she just stayed in her house for 27 years or the rest of her life. So here's the poem. Listen carefully. Me, from myself, to banish, had I art, impregnable my fortress unto all heart. But since myself assault me, how have I peace except by subjugating consciousness? And since we're mutual monarch, how this be except by abdication, me of me? Can you feel that? So you can ask yourself, how many times have you abdicated your true self? To look a certain way or to please a certain... It's like a disease, but it's very, very common. And we can write ourselves a restraining order in the sense of just being aware of it. We don't have to go there, and then it will liberate itself, like if we touch it with awareness, just like the soap bubble. We don't take it personally, it's not yours. And the whole poem is personal pronoun. Me, from myself, to banish, had I art, impregnable my fortress unto all heart. Then I'd never have to feel this way. But since myself assault me, and we're talking about sexual assault, we do assault on ourselves all the time. And we don't really recognize that it's a form of harm. But since myself assault me, how have I peace? How can I live inside my life or my body except by subjugating consciousness? In other words, going unconscious, mindless. The first thing you notice when you start to cultivate mindfulness, I'll tell you, the first thing you notice, and it endures, is how mindless you are. So it's really important not to take that personally. And then you work the muscle and it slowly starts to grow. But since we're mutual monarch, how this be except by abdication, me of me? And when we abdicate, then that's a form of self-harm. It's a form of violence. It's sadness. So you feel that? So here's the last poem. This is by Derek Walcott, who is Nobel laureate in literature. So I managed to get 2 Nobel laureates in literature into the same talk. That's never happened before. So Bob Dylan and now Derek Walcott, who is from the island of St. Lucia in the Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean poet. And this poem is called Love After Love, and it's insanely beautiful in my view, one of my favorites. And so think about Emily Dickinson and the splitting of me from me, the rending, and the cost of that personally, versus this poem. The time will come when with elation you will greet yourself arriving in your own door, at your own door. The time will come when with elation you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to yourself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, who you have ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit. Feast on your life. So that's what mindfulness is. Not necessarily sitting, although sometimes it looks like sitting, but really it's dropping into now and feasting on the actuality of things, the good, the bad, the unwanted, the wanted, and recognizing that none of that is you, that you are so much bigger. Walt Whitman said, I am large, I contain multitudes. It's true. We are sort of not just, we are a universe. 100 trillion cells make up this one body. All, by the way, coming out of one cell. All of us, by the way, coming out of the bodies of women. And the developmental arc goes from the one cell till our last breath. So we always have the capacity for learning, growing, healing, and transformation. And while we may not know whether Alzheimer's is in our future or what is in our future, if you want the future to be different, just think about it for a minute. What kind of leverage do you have? There's only one place you could put the fulcrum to leverage the future. If you are willing to be fully embodied in this moment, in silence, in stillness, in motion, in love, in dance, if you're willing to be fully with this moment, does that or does that not somehow influence what might emerge in the next moment? What would you say? I would say that's the only chance we have. If you're willing to show up in this moment, the next moment's going to be entirely different. Why? Because you showed up for it. And you are recruiting or tuning into more degrees of freedom, more dimensions of your own multidimensional being. That's the love affair, folks. That's true health and true well-being. And the universe needs you. The earth needs you. It needs every single one of us. We now know that like diversity doesn't just mean like what we always thought it meant. It's like diversity is like, it's a very, very big field. Very big field. And while we need to recognize everybody else's beauty, it would be criminal to not also recognize our own. Way beyond the story. Way beyond the names and forms that we assign to like being a this or a that. And live our way into what it means to be fully human. I see this as kind of like if mindfulness used to be valuable for people and was helpful for stress reduction, and we have close to 40 years of evidence from cutting edge scientific disciplines now and increasing numbers of studies, if it was ever that way before, now it's absolutely essential. It is, in some sense, if we don't reclaim what it means to be human and learn to live our way into the name we gave ourselves as a species, Homo sapiens sapiens, the species that knows and knows that it knows, awareness and awareness of awareness, the prognosis for us as a kind of autoimmune disease of the planet is not so good. So that means all of us are necessary. It's not about me, it's about we. It's like every single one of us, in some sense, is a flower. And as I like to put it, the world needs all its flowers. And to me, that is optimizing health, optimizing well-being, optimizing beauty, optimizing love, not romanticizing it one single bit. Warts, pimples, and everything. How about putting the welcome mat out for that? So I want to thank you for your attention. Let's take one more moment and just drop in again to the breath and to silence. Letting go of everything that's been said, everything that's been heard. If some of it landed, fine, but no need to cling to any of it. It's a lifetime's engagement. And it's truly the adventure of a lifetime. And if we begin to take care of ourselves and take care of each other and take care of the planet in this kind of a way, the science, the medical evidence, social evidence, the environmental evidence all speaks to healing and transformation and optimizing well-being. Not in some wonderful future when it all comes together, but right here in this moment. And if we can live that way, the world is already different than when we walked into this room at 9 o'clock. And since we only have moments to live, we might as well inhabit them as best we can. So I want to thank you for your attention. It's been an absolute honor for me to come and talk with you. I want to thank the organizers for putting on a conference of this kind of out-of-the-box kind of conference that really drills down to the essence, and wish you well. Thank you.